Hello, I am Reverend Stephen Fiske, founder and executive producer of the Jerusalem Prayer Project, here in Los Angeles with my fellow co-hosts, welcoming you to our premiere webumentary, Peace Sunday 2020, We Carry the Dream.
Talofa, I am Laura Sa Pele Lapoia Ava, and I'm the CEO and board chair of Unity and Diversity World Council and Peace Sundays. I'm also the founder and president of One Global Family Foundation and Alliances. We are honored to sponsor and co-produce Peace Sunday 2020. Aloha.
And I am Robert Corsini, filmmaker and owner of Videocratic Media, producer of Peace Sunday 2020. This year's full-length program showcases 14 stories from a uniquely interfaith perspective that can also be screened as individual segments on our website, peacesundays.org.
Peace Sunday is traditionally an annual event taking place in Southern California, honoring the United Nations International Day of Peace, September 21st. It features interfaith and indigenous leaders, activists, artists, and performers, all addressing critical issues of our times that are impacting us locally and globally.
From Washington, D.C. to Standing Rock, San Onofre to Charlottesville, Los Angeles to Jerusalem, our stories include exclusive interviews and musical performances interspersed with excerpts from Martin Luther King Jr.'s prophetic I Have a Dream speech that frame the legacy of sacred activism with the challenges we face today.
We always begin our Peace Sunday program with ceremony and prayer offered by our Native American elders honoring this land, Turtle Island.
We'd like all of you to join us in opening our hearts and exploring our own hearts in bringing ourselves to peace, planetary peace and harmony with Mother Earth and all of creation.
May the sacred feminine speak and be heard. It is in the time of the White Buffalo prophecy now that the healing of our world will come through the womb of sacred women, all the sacred feminines. All we must stand together as the male energy and the female together. May this peace of the male and the female of the one love come together in a good way, in a good road, and bring peace in our earth with all elders, with all children, and all the many creations around us today that live and breathe. We send our blessings to our global family.
Greetings. I'm delighted to join you all for this Peace Sunday 2020. I thank Dr. Namazakar of the Iman Cultural Center for the invitation, and I congratulate all of this year's sponsors. It is an honor for me to join all of the community leaders, faith leaders, and indigenous elders at this amazing event.
In August 1963, I was 17 years old and had just graduated from the High School of Music and Art in New York City and was participating in civil rights marches and singing the folk songs and the songs of freedom of that era. I traveled to Washington, D.C. for the Great March for Jobs and Freedom, where Martin Luther King gave the I Have a Dream speech. Years later, with fellow songwriter Sophia Roberts, we wrote the song We Carry the Dream, commemorating Dr. King and that historic day. In 2018, the 55th anniversary of the Great March, we recorded and filmed this tribute to Dr. King, connecting the legacy of the American nonviolent movement with today's Black Lives Matter movement, which gave us the theme for this year's Peace Sunday.
Freedom Now movement, hear me. We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington, to go by plane, car, bus, any way that you can get there. Walk if necessary. We are pushing for jobs, housing, desegregated schools. This is an urgent request. Please join. Go to Washington.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slaves will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My children.
One fine summer day, 1963, the Great March for Civil Rights took on Washington, D.C. They marched for freedom, they marched for jobs, they marched for dignity. They marched for the conscience of the nation, for justice and equality. A 250,000 gathered there in Washington that day. Hear the Reverend Dr. King lift his voice and say, I have a dream, and we witnessed history. Now it's up to all of us to carry the legacy. So we're singing, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. From the streets of Birmingham to that Nobel Prize he won, Reverend King let freedom ring, shines his light for everyone. Now people anywhere who've been denied their rights find vision, strength, and inspiration to carry on the fight. So we're saying, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. You can't keep a baby from needing to be touched and loved. You can't keep the trees from reaching for the sky above, and you can't stop the river from rolling to the sea, and you can't keep the people from the hunger to be free. So we're singing, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. Shall be free. Shall be free. All people shall be free. We carry the dream
Here's a look back at Peace Sunday's history that began in 1982, focusing on nuclear freeze and the socio-political as well as the spiritual struggles of the time, leading up to today's Peace Sunday 2020 production.
In 1982, during the height of the Cold War, as the Soviet Union and the United States engaged in the nuclear arms race and fears of nuclear holocaust plagued the planet, a mass movement for a nuclear freeze arose. In California, the culmination of the movement took place on June 6, 1982, at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. The event was called Peace Sunday. Performers included Stevie Wonder, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Stevie Nicks, Jackson Browne, Linda Ronstadt. Speakers included Muhammad Ali, Jesse Jackson, Jane Fonda, Dolores Huerta, Rabbi Leonard Bierman, the Reverend James Lawson. Peace Sunday combined humanitarian and planetary concerns with music and message, setting the stage for future global link-ups such as Live Aid and other mega concerts, raising funds for disaster relief and various causes. Peace Sunday was produced by the Year of Shalom Committee, a coalition of peace and justice and interfaith groups. In subsequent years, the Unity and Diversity Council, a Los Angeles interfaith group, has picked up where the Year of Shalom left off and has produced annual Peace Sunday events at various locations throughout the Los Angeles area. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Peace Sunday. So glad that you're here. This is the time to be here. This is the time to proclaim who we are. This is the time to stand up for peace. In the aftermath of 9/11, as America marched towards war with Iraq, Peace Sunday courageously featured Muslim American leader, peace activist, and co-founder of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, Dr. Meher Hattout, and Congresswoman Barber, the only member of Congress to have voted against the Iraq War.
We really need a peace revolution. Peace is divine, like justice.
Peace is not just the absence of tension, but it is the presence of justice. Presence of justice. Peace and justice go together.
This culture of war, led by the military-industrial complex, catering to the lowest denominator in people, only serving the few on the expense of the many, and just hypnotizing the nation on the drums of war to march is not what the citizens of a democracy should allow to happen.
So, my brothers and sisters, let us take with us the spirit and the ideals and the hope of Peace Sunday displayed today and live each and every day as if it were Peace Sunday, so that the future is created based upon what we stand for today.
Nobody will do that but you, but us. All together, one nation, under God. May God bless you.
May peace prevail on earth.
Good, and not merely the absence of conflict. It's not merely the absence of conflict or negativity. It's actually a quality that is real as love and beauty and harmony. And when we rise to the level of being able to harbor and have an activity of this kind of peace within us, then we become the harbingers of a kind and just global society, and our steps are rooted in compassion and love and forgiveness and nonviolence and ahimsa, because it is a part of us. And it's not merely a belief system of what should happen. It births a way of living, of how we deal with each other, how we talk to each other, how we collaborate, how we come together and reason together, so that ultimately that vibration of peace and unconditional love becomes the kind of a clarion call that tears down the Jericho wall of the prison industrial system, the war system that seems so strong and so big. When individuals rise up and become keenly aware that the greatest power on the planet is within them, call it by whatever name you want to call it, by whatever religion you are a part of, this presence, when it becomes so real to us, then our steps are ordered by the Lord of that activity, and we're guided to do exactly what is necessary for our time in human history.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children.
To bring peace to the world in these turbulent times, we call upon the spirits of our ancestors and to all the sacred protectors of water and life. We call out to all the rainbow warriors of peace and justice worldwide. Rise up and speak truth to power, as it happened in 2016 at Standing Rock, North Dakota, in opposition to the Dakota Access Pipeline. Here's a powerful music video produced by musician Trevor Hall, birthed from the struggles of thousands of water protectors who converged upon Standing Rock to stand in solidarity with representatives of hundreds of nations from across the Americas and around the world, all showing up to challenge the black snake dapple.
To the east and west, to the north and south, warrior, warrior, gather every tribe, Mama needs you now. Warrior, warrior, the suits are moving in just to get that dollar. Treaties being broken, no respect or honor. Earn the sage and cedar, spirit is the leader. Warrior, warrior.
We speak of Standing Rock as one, where in the beginning it was a test between our nations to come together and to support. And then the other nations came, and then more. It appears as though that once the world saw and witnessed the many nations of our people coming together in unity, supporting each other for this cause of the black snake that is all around the world, but in this particular place, it's Standing Rock.
The black snake is the pipelines that are carrying oil to different parts of the world. The farmland that grows the food that nourishes our body is being poisoned. The XL pipeline goes under farmland in the Dakotas. It pollutes the water. It poisons the water. It's not safe. We have other means for energy, and we need to explore those, to develop those. Rather than wringing the last of the oil out of the earth, we can leave it where it was created.
And this black snake is deadly, poisonous to all our teachings, to all our sacred elements. And so we've been able to understand that Standing Rock brought that forward, as many people, especially young people, created songs about this prophecy of the black snake, and that oil, taken the blood of Mother Earth, taken from her depths of love and life, brought forward into the daylight and ran not for the benefit of mankind, but for greed.
Nations came from all over the world, hundreds of nations, to support the battle against the black snake.
If you are around, stand up like a mountain.
The greed sickness is the greatest disease on Mother Earth today. The greed of the colonizer to take and not give back.
And we need to remain vigilant and be supportive of not just the major movements, but all movements that are trying to protect our Mother Nature and bring peace to the planet.
While Standing Rock activists did not stop the Dakota Access Pipeline, they did succeed in bringing people together from all over the world, especially from the indigenous nations, and raised national and global awareness as to the extreme dangers of fossil fuel extraction, fracking, and pipeline transport, which set the stage for other activist interventions, such as the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which achieved a different outcome. In rural West Virginia, and eastern North Carolina, a 600-mile-long, multi-billion-dollar pipeline with compressor stations is being carved into the heart of the landscape, all to export huge quantities of environmentally destructive fracked gas, a fossil fuel that catastrophically feeds climate change.
This proposed pipeline is a reckless, racist ripoff.
Corporate giant Dominion Energy and its affiliates maintain a monopolistic stranglehold on the region, imposing its exploitative will on the people.
We have a moral problem in this country and in this county when it comes to environmental injustice. The text that rabbis, Muslims, and Christians honor will tell you that God's vision was for us to take care of the land, the water, and the air, and not to destroy it. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 says, "Then God said, let us make man in our own image and in the likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish and the sea." And the Lord was not talking about a company. He wasn't talking about dominion or duke power. The correct understanding is one is to have dominion in terms of service, responsibility, and stewardship of the land, the water, and the air. The prophets would remind them that any time a community or a king violated the covenant of constructive well-being dominion, they were in fact engaged in defiling the land. You say, Pastor, how you know? Because Isaiah 24:4-6 says, "The earth dries up and withers, the world languishes and withers, the exalted of the earth languish. The earth is defiled by its people. They have disobeyed the laws, violated the statutes, and broken the everlasting covenant with God. Therefore, a curse consumes the earth," global warming. A curse consumes the earth. People can't find clean drinking water, and its people must bear the guilt. Therefore, earth's inhabitants are burned up because they violated the covenant to take care of the earth.
We've gotten to a point in our country where the Supreme Court has ruled that corporations are people and money is speech. And I have understood most of my life that corporations were the most important economic units in our country. But I don't like the fact that they believe they are the most important political actors in our country. We, the people of the United States of America, have to reclaim our own destiny and make the decisions about what our lives are going to be like, what our environment's going to be like, whether our air is going to be clean, whether our water is fit to drink, whether our land is going to be free from poison. whether our children are going to be able to have a fine and decent and clean and safe future. You know, global warming can be hard to hear about. The climate crisis is something some people don't want to hear about. We're putting 110 million tons of heat-trapping man-made global warming pollution up into the sky every day. And sky is not a vast expanse, it's a thin shell around the planet. And it stays, that heat-trapping pollution stays there. And the ocean is heating up so much that it's like a tea kettle on the stove. The steam is coming out, water vapor going into the sky, and when that comes over the land, you get these rain bombs like Hurricane Florence. And the scientists who told us that this was going to happen have been proven right. The fact that they've been proven right in their past predictions should cause us to pay a little bit more attention to what they're telling us will happen if we don't stop using the sky as an open sewer for all of this heat-trapping gas and threatening our future. But here's the good news, and it circles back to something I was talking about earlier. When I said solar and wind is coming down in cost every single month, it is. We have the solution to the climate crisis, and it creates jobs. What is the fastest growing job in the United States of America? According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics last month, solar installer. Over the last several years, 5 times faster than any other job. Second fastest growing job, wind turbine technician. We can put people to work at good wages, in good jobs, getting rid of the pollution, saving our future, solving the climate crisis, and making this entire damnable, reckless, racist ripoff of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline unnecessary. And if anybody doubts we have the political will to win, remember, political will is a renewable resource. Thank you.
This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're going now from Standing Rock to Appalachia, where anti-pipeline activists won another massive victory over the weekend when Duke and Dominion Energy said they'd cancel plans to build the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, a 600-mile pipeline that would have carried frack gas from West Virginia to North Carolina. Indigenous leaders and environmental groups have opposed the pipeline since it was announced in 2014, saying it threatened rural Indigenous, Black and brown communities. For more on the canceled Atlantic Coast Pipeline, we go to Pembroke, North Carolina, where we're joined by Donna Chavis, senior fossil fuel campaigner for Friends of the Earth, elder of the Lumbee Nation. She's called the fight against the pipeline a David versus Goliath struggle. It looks like you have won this struggle, Donna Chavis. Can you respond to the decision and where you think it came from?
I think it came from a number of sources. Of course, we have Duke and Dominion's answer in that it became too expensive and all of the delays caused by people on the ground forced them to pull out. What the decision means is that the environment, the communities that would have suffered irreparable harm, and the Indigenous, Black, and other peoples of color who would have been disproportionately impacted had the pipeline been built, are now have that cloud lifted from them.
Another example of environmental dangers that require activist attention and intervention is the decommissioned yet increasingly dangerous San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, located only 30 minutes away from my home in Orange County, California. With its 3.5 million pounds of highly toxic and deadly nuclear waste, which poses a massive contamination threat to all of Southern California's coastline and extending into Mexico. From Tijuana to San Diego to Los Angeles, me, my family and friends, and the 25 million people who call this place home, as well as all the living things in the water, upon the earth, and in the air, we are all under threat right here, right now, from a disaster that is far worse than Fukushima and Chernobyl combined.
San Onofre was the first full-scale civilian power plant in the United States to ever be operational. They started building it in 1968, and there were 3 nuclear power domes there. There are 2 that still remain. Each one has 4 nuclear reactors inside of it. These were decommissioned or taken offline in 2013 after one of them sprang a leak because Southern California Edison, the owners, had purchased defective nuclear equipment that was actually a part of their efforts to cost cut and make more money. They decided to shut the facility down. There was a huge financial scandal surrounding it because they wanted the ratepayers to pay for it, which was totally wrong. And then because they didn't have anywhere to put the nuclear waste that was created by this whole debacle, they decided to bury it on the beach, which unfortunately is one of the very few places they have to put it. It's 108 feet from the beach. It's in a tsunami inundation zone on top of an earthquake fault line. And our objective as public watchdogs is to compel them to store this nuclear waste in safer canisters, safer containers, further away from the beach on the facility. Legally, it's going to be almost impossible to move it away from San Onofre State Beach Park at this time, just given the way the laws are written right now. To move the nuclear waste within the site boundary is something that's eminently doable. It's obviously going to be expensive. It'd probably be a couple $2 billion, but it's permitted, it's been done, we know how to do it, and it's very much within the realm of possibility. When we think of nuclear reactors, we think of meltdowns as being the big risk, but I've come to think of the nuclear waste as being more of a risk because these reactors were really generated to create plutonium for nuclear bombs. We ended up using them for energy back in the 70s and 80s when we had an energy crisis. We built all these nuclear reactors, but also the energy was a really nice surplus byproduct. And now we're sitting with, just at San Onofre alone, there's 3.5 million pounds of this deadly, toxic nuclear waste with nowhere to go. And they're storing it in cans that are only guaranteed to last 25 years. The American government's only 245 years old. We don't know what the world's going to be like 100 years from now, much less 10,000, 20,000, or 200,000 years from now. So this issue of what we do with nuclear waste is really very, very important, and how we solve this problem, and more importantly, how we store it in the short term, because the only thing we're seeing out of our government and policymakers right now are short-term solutions. They're literally kicking the Chernobyl can down the road. And some people have called these big, giant canisters of nuclear waste mobile Chernobyls, because that's what they are. Each canister contains more radioactive cesium than was released at the entire Chernobyl disaster into the atmosphere. And there's 73 of them buried in concrete silos on the beach at San Onofre State Beach Park.
Be as committed as you are over these years without having a deep spiritual connection to this work and what it means. Can you connect your spiritual work with this, with that of the Native Americans who have been there forever? And
in September of 2016, I was working on this, and I remember thinking we've done everything we can. We haven't got a prayer. I literally thought, we haven't got a prayer. And I was holding this piece of pipe stone, the stone you make peace pipes from, in my hand. And I'd carved it into the shape of an eagle. And I looked at it and I thought, well, what if I prayed? You know, that's a novel idea. So probably for the first time in a couple of years, I actually prayed. And then something very unusual happened. About 30 seconds later, a woman named Michelle Anderson from a radio show called 1111 Awakening Code called me and said, I just met this amazing man named Chief Phil from the Dakota tribe. He lives in British Columbia right now, and he heard about what you're trying to do, and he wants to come down to San Onofre in a few days and do ceremony. 4 days later, Chief Phil flew down. He created this ritual where 30 dedicated activists kind of made a vow in front of that nuclear reactor, which wasn't very far away, to protect that beach. And the newspapers picked it up and kind of called it sacred activism. And then I have since really come to believe that there's tremendous power in group prayer and the harnessing of group intentions and group consciousness. So there have been many times when a lot of us have gotten together to pray and meditate, often on that beach, to focus on a viable, safe solution for the nuclear waste at San Onofre. So I don't think we'd have the resources which have been made available to us, which have been formidable, without the prayers of many, many people who have wished us well and have been hoping for a solution.
Taking good care of this beach long before white settlers and this plant arrived here, dating back 10,000 years, were Native American members of the Ahishiman Nation, whose traditions, like honoring the ocean, are still practiced by members today.
To give honor to the ocean, to the grandmother.
The Ahishiman Nation's Adelia Sandoval says her people consider the nuclear waste here a cancer to the community. Not to mention, she says, the insult of the plant being built on what she says was an Ahishiman gravesite for her ancestors. The remains of at least one ancestor, she says, was found here during construction in the 1960s.
The remains of this ancestor was telling us that something was going on and that something was wrong. It's like having a tumor on your body and it's just there and there's nothing you can do about it. You've tried to do something about it, but you can't because no one has been listening about it.
I want to take a moment and uplift the voices of Grandmother Adelia Sandoval and her Ahishiman Nation, the stewards of this land of Orange County. I also want to acknowledge the critical work of Charles Langley and his public watchdogs crew. They have all been a major part of our team since 2016 for One Global Family's daily sacred activism broadcasts to raise awareness and take action. Along with my dearest co-producers, Heather and Jason Powers and Michelle Anderson, I want to thank them all for their unwavering commitment to protect our great Mother Earth, her waters, and all her inhabitants. Mahalo, fa'afetai telelava.
We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force.
There was a man named Mahatma Gandhi. He would not bow down, he would not bite. He knew the deal was down and dirty. Nothing wrong could make it right away. But he knew his duty and the price he had to pay. Just another holy man, dared to be a friend. My God, they killed him.
20 years ago, I had the unique honor to sit down with the late Lakota musician, actor, and political activist, Floyd Red Crow Westerman, to discuss his research behind the story of how smallpox-infected blankets were used as biological weapons, tools of genocide by generations of colonizers, in an effort to exterminate native peoples spanning the Americas. I produced this never-before-seen interview with Floyd in 2001 at his home in Venice, California. His words and insights are as poignant today as they were back then.
People will use this kind of method to kill. It's not surprising. The secret about the way America wants to tell history. America designed history the way it is written to leave out the crime scenes. Biological warfare was first used by the British in Massachusetts by Lord Jeffrey Amherst, who ordered these smallpox blankets handed out. It was a direct order from military sources that these blankets would be used to exterminate Indian people. So it was an attitude of biological warfare as a way of killing, using blankets as a murder weapon. After it was used in New England, it spread out to within New England to where even civilian farmers were doing this to help clear the land, because the policy was in the sense that if there's no Indians in the area, it's okay to go and spread out and use that land, clear it. Well, there were Indians from coast to coast, so when that policy came out, well, farmers would just start using it without any military permission, without any directive from anybody else. They would do this to the local Indians in their area. Most people think there's a westward expansion from New England all the way across to the west, but the Spaniards came up around in San Diego, and then when they moved and populated California, by the time the Mexican government and the United States government had taken control of California over the war with Mexico, then the United States Army started to use smallpox blankets in California. Matter of fact, there's a plaque out on Interstate 10 at a rest area about how Juan Antonio of the Cahuilla people, 60% of the people were killed at this time. So it was across the country and widespread.
Another man from Atlanta, Georgia, name of Martin Luther King, shook the land like rolling thunder, made the bell of freedom ring that day, but his dream of beauty that they could not burn away. Just another holy man who dared to be a friend. My God, they killed him.
Certainly the connection for our Native American brothers and sisters when it comes to the COVID pandemic, the reality, as we know, with our Native brothers and sisters, is that disease was introduced by the Anglo contact. So in the Native American culture, whole cultures almost were decimated. Again, if we go back in our history and look at Manifest Destiny, who did we need to displace? It was people who were not people. They were described as less than human in the most polite language. And it's because of this that we give permission to violate civil rights because people are no longer people, they are objects. So I think our Native American brothers and sisters have so suffered, and the reservation system, the reality of this transgenerational idea of being objectified, less than human, and again, the understanding that in many ways, speaking up is less a virtue than following customs.
We are blessed to have with us today Dr. Simon Simonian, who was on the team of doctors and scientists who originally developed the smallpox vaccine, leading to its global eradication in 1980. It proves that science can perform miracles, but only if humanity acts as one.
We did this work on smallpox vaccination in London University in the 50s, which was eventually taken up by the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, to vaccinate everybody and eradicate smallpox 10 years later in 1978. But the World Health Organization waited 2 more years to be sure that there were no cases of smallpox in the world.
In how COVID is being dealt with today, we see that the most vulnerable are economically deprived. There is an implicit bias impacting the people who are becoming infected. Do you feel or do you fear that public health and a disease and pandemic such as this can be manipulated and used for political reasons?
If the authorities in the country force the public health director to put out statements which are not scientific for fear that he could be fired from his position, for example, then he might begin to falsify some of the statements to his own protection and to the suffering of the people. Yes, and this has happened throughout history. There are disparities in terms of the number of people dying from this COVID-19 disease. It's much higher proportion in those who are minorities, who are African American, who are Hispanic, and these people are more susceptible to the infection, and they are dying at a higher rate. And also, being poor, they don't have preventive measures or education because of their poverty to prevent the infection. I think the future is hopeful. Like many other diseases which are caused by a virus, we have sort of subdued the majority of them, whether it's measles or whether it's polio and flu, the influenza. We have subdued most of them, and we can live reasonably safely with these around, but they are much weakened, and we expect the same thing to happen with COVID-19, provided we have centralized authority that is really helping the people and helping the scientists and helping the World Health Organization to make sure, and these companies, to make sure that we don't do it alone, that we are working together with everybody in the world.
I think when I look at my own background in terms of experiencing racism and bringing it up to current times where being an Asian American in light of this pandemic, you can still see this consistent string of a very black and white kind of thinking that represents this need to create good and bad. And again, this is part of that survival brain, the reptilian brain. And again, I'm mindful that as I walk the streets and participate in daily life, that just as the Pew Center research indicated, it was both for Asian Americans and, interestingly enough, for Black Americans as well, that the idea of behavior and verbal abuse is operating in 3 out of 10 Japanese Americans, about 4 out of 10 Black Americans during this COVID kind of time. For us, the chosen group that could become the enemy because of this virus is still very much an activated part of our culture here.
U.S. Congresswoman Maxine Waters has been a fierce fighter for social justice throughout her entire career. She truly understands how to connect the dots between the greatest challenges of our time.
This year's Peace Sunday comes in the midst of an unprecedented public health crisis, one that is causing economic dislocation, illness, and death across the United States and around the world. In times like these, it is especially important that we come together as Americans of different faiths, traditions, and cultures to celebrate our common humanity and to honor the hopes and dreams that we all share. Let me begin by expressing my profound sympathies to those of you who have lost friends and loved ones to COVID-19. My dear sister was one of the more than 218,000 Americans and 1 million people around the world whose lives were tragically cut short by this terrible disease. This pandemic has exacerbated the disparities and the injustices in our society. COVID-19, like so many other diseases, is having a disproportionate impact on people of color. According to the Centers for Disease Control, African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans are all about 5 times more likely to be hospitalized for COVID-19 as white Americans. Globally, the coronavirus has also impacted some countries more severely than others. The U.S. has the greatest number of COVID-19 deaths in the world, more than 218,000. It is in this context that we remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic I Have a Dream speech, which inspired Americans from all walks of life to work for peace, equality, and social justice. I'm so proud to see so many religious leaders, Black Lives Matter activists, indigenous leaders, climate activists, and others finding creative ways to safely come together and continue the struggle for peace and justice.
While science and medicine have brought forth amazing new discoveries for human healing, learning how to manage our social integrity of living together in peaceful coexistence is an entirely different matter.
My mission in life is to eradicate human prejudice against, especially religions, and focused on Jewish-Muslim relations. I really work hard on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia both, as a Muslim and somebody who is a scholar of Holocaust and Jewish studies. We have to invite people across a divide on the table. If I talk to people who are just like-minded, I'm not making a difference. But I need to talk to people who are not like-minded. I need to talk to more Jews who are not sympathetic to Arabs. I think Jews need to talk, to Jews that are not sympathetic to Muslims. So I think this is why it's so important to speak for the other. And I think it's really important that we let people enter that are different. There are people on this campus that support Trump. There are my students. I love them dearly, but we talk and we have conversation. So there's a lot of interesting ways of talking to each other without being politically creating a shouting match or an emotional match, which is unnecessary. And I think these are the skills that I have as an educator. I don't think I would have these skills if I were just, someone walking in the street and somebody was offensive. And I think learning so much history and looking at people that guns and shouting matches and emotional responses have just destroyed more lives along the way. If you look at the civil rights movement, Abraham Heschel was arm in arm with Martin Luther King. His daughter was just here at this college last year, Susanna Heschel, to give a lecture and spend some time with me, and it was an honor. Because what she did was, she didn't talk about the Holocaust, she talked about today.
and the prejudice and the rise of anti-Semitism and how we have to act, because she has that legacy of the civil rights movement.
The alliance between Dr. Martin Luther King and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was extraordinary but not surprising. These were people of color and Jews who historically had the common experience of being subjugated, of suffering prejudice, of being alienated and demonized. And it was a natural alliance for them to come together. Abraham Joshua Heschel said they were praying with their feet, that the marching was a sacred, prayerful occasion. That's a model of that coalition of those communities that we are seeing renewed around the country today. Here in Los Angeles, I'm active in a group called the Black Jewish Justice Alliance. Blacks and Jews coming together in the spirit of King and Heschel to achieve and advance those interests in civil rights and civil liberties.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. How are you doing? We are here at the first gathering, the Heschel King Forum, the first one put on by the Jewish Justice Alliance. We have worked on criminal justice issues. We have been in the forefront and we're getting stronger, and after today we'll have all of you working with us.
So today I want for us to be honest about what we see when we examine the body of our nation. Yes, there is a great and awful pain in the gut. It is the pain of polarization and division. It is the ache of cruelty and incivility. As the world gets more hateful, more dishonest, and more dangerous, we must become even better versions of ourselves, more patient, more compassionate, more loving. Because in the end, it is only love that wins. Activists from abolitionists to civil rights leaders were often people of faith, whose belief in God and whose reading of the Bible compelled them to resist the norms of slaveholder religion and affirm the sanctity of all human life and the dignity of all of God's children. We are called to build globally networked communities of love. We need to stand together, arm in arm, side by side, reclaiming an ethic that fights systemic oppression and treats every single one of us with love, with respect, and with dignity.
And I'm very excited by the renewed alliances between people of color, Black Lives Matter, and Jewish organizations, synagogues, congregations, and individuals. I think it is one of the most positive signs in our current political atmosphere to see that renewal, and it's deeply ingrained and embedded of Dr. King that the arc of history bends toward justice, but someone has to push it to bend it.
The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny.
In the summer of 2018, I was working on a documentary project on anti-Semitism that sent me to Charlottesville to film grassroots activists who valiantly stood their ground against the alt-right's menacing and deadly invasion of their city in August the year before. I recently revisited this material and edited this short. Here's an excerpt from my latest work, Charlottesville Reflection.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh,
started it all. Robert E. Lee. A man that lost the war, a man that deserves no recognition, a man that stood for oppressing people of color. There you have it, General Robert E. Lee. I have never known second place to win a prize.
Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Yes, my people.
McIntyre's a donor from UVA. He had a lot of land around here. It was in like the 1920s. He donated lots of land, and this was one of the lots he donated, and he asked for Black people not to be allowed on the space, and they said you can't do that. So he instead put a Confederate monument because he knew that that would deter Black people from coming into the space, and donated it with the KKK surrounding it. That's just historic. There's historical documents of that. I think even presenting that to people don't know this history. Simple as that. And we have buildings named after these racist people who built Charlottesville. So our whole community has been built on racist ideals.
Now, after World War II, they removed all of Hitler's statues. They removed all the imagery of the Holocaust. But here, people of color have to literally look at this every day. Something that stood for the oppressing of our ancestors, Indians, Blacks, poor whites. This is what we have to deal with. But I feel like he needs to go as well. In a museum, if you want to tell the story of history, go to a museum and see him. He does not belong here. This was a thriving Black community, and you put a statue that stood for the oppressing of Black people. That's disrespect, pure disrespect.
Get him off! Get him off the truck!
It was a weekend of street battles and stark displays of racism, exploding into a deadly act.
One of the scariest aspects of what happened in Charlottesville in the summer of 2017 was that you had hundreds of neo-Nazis and white supremacists coming to Charlottesville to protest, exercising that right of free speech, while also being able to exercise their right to bear arms. To me, that was a huge problem. And I saw it with my own eyes. Just guns and more guns. I've never seen so many guns. And then even this past weekend in Charlottesville, when they really kind of almost locked down the downtown area, there was a published list of all the things that you cannot bring into downtown Charlottesville, like skateboards or razors or flagpoles or knives, but you could still bring a gun. I think the intensity took me by surprise. Actually, it wasn't even who came, it was how the police reacted that really took me by surprise. Just the stand down and watching people fighting.
Blood and soil. Jews will not replace us. Jews will not erase us. White power. They were calling the N-word. It was so much that was used that day. It was so much violence that went on that day. It was just so much to really intake.
We could very clearly see it on the ground, what was going on, but the fact that nobody else understood that people came to our city to attack us.
We are on 4th Street.
It's a sad moment when a movement born out of commitment to end systemic racism and police brutality has come to be vilified as violent, destructive, and unlawful, when the overwhelming majority of the Black Lives Matter marches have been peaceful and nonviolent. Civil rights icon and Martin Luther King mentor, the Reverend James Lawson, and Black Lives Matter Los Angeles co-founder, Dr. Melina Abdullah, sat down with us recently to discuss the status of the streets and the struggle.
History looks back. Well, it's looking back now, but it mostly identifies Charlottesville as a consequence of a very violent society, of violence that has 300 or 400 years of practice and community life. So the mistreatment of Indian, the decimation, the hanging of women as witches, these things we have never repudiated, and we have never sought, therefore, to put in place a different way of living.
Anyone who has been around Black Lives Matter knows that the core of Black Lives Matter is really a spiritual movement, right? That the struggle for justice for our people is a sacred duty, and much of the work is grounded in spiritual practice. We cannot expect to transform the world without the presence of the Creator, without calling on our mightiest warrior ancestors to help us align with the struggle for Black freedom that goes back generations.
Hold that name in your mind, and we're all gonna say the name of our own ancestors together. 1, 2, 3. Ashe.
When we come out, oftentimes we are standing on the spilled blood of our people. And to think that the work doesn't have a spiritual component is to be hugely naive. So we always ground ourselves with the pouring of libation. We engage in prayer, and we do a lot of affirmation work. Remembering that this is a long and sometimes very difficult and challenging struggle, but our victory is ensured as long as we're committed to that struggle. White supremacist terrorism is not the group of folks we're trying to appeal to. So anyone who is casting the calling for the valuation of Black life as an evil thing is problematic themselves. And so, you know, that's other people's work to try to convert or transform those folks. That's not the group that we're engaging in. And so, you know, we believe in, when we say Black Lives Matter, it's a rallying cry specifically to Black folks, but also to non-Black folks who view themselves as allies or accomplices in the struggle for Black freedom.
We ain't playing. This system of policing has got to go. You can't call on Mama Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and David Walker and all of these people and then say we gonna hold on to a remnant of the system that they gave their lives to abolish. Hell no. We are going to reimagine and build new systems of community safety.
And what's the future for Black Lives Matter after this election?
Well, Black Lives Matter has never primarily tied itself to electoral politics, right? We understand that the way that the world transforms is through both protest and politics. When you think that you move from protest to politics, that means that you're no longer a movement. And so the work that we've done in the streets is our primary work. November 3rd is going to come and go. We hope to win major victories on November 3rd. Of course, we want to see this administration, this federal administration gone, but that's not our primary work. Our primary work is the work on the ground that will ultimately transform the world. Black Lives Matter is a movement. It's not a nonprofit organization in the traditional sense. You know, we're not run by executive directors and staff. We're run by regular people. I'm a regular mom and an educator. I do this work not as a job, but as a sacred duty, as a commitment to my children and a commitment to the world, a commitment to my ancestors and the Creator. And I think all of us, the thousands of us that make up Black Lives Matter, view it the same way.
Those demonstrations have brought us the greatest diversity of people walking and marching, also the greatest diversity of issues. I name only one issue: the issue of what kind of law, stability, and encouragement do you develop in a democracy? To date, the gun and violence is the central form of abuse of power. But how we can develop community policing that is fair and just and contributes to the advancement of communities being indeed just and fair.
Sometimes a photograph can capture the mood and the attention of the world. In June, one image did just that. During a protest on the streets of London, events turned violent. The Black Lives Matter group was there to condemn statues of people with racist ties, and many white protesters were there to protect the statues. Things got heated. One man, Bryn Male, a white former police officer, wandered into the crowd and he started to get beat up. One of the Black Lives Matter protesters, Patrick Hutchinson, saw that he was in peril. Patrick moved in, picked up the injured Bryn, carried him through the crowd to safety.
The biggest thing for me was making sure that no harm came to him, because I knew if harm had come to him, the narrative would just be changed, and then the blame would fall on the young Black Lives Matter protesters. We made sure we got him out of there safely.
Patrick, a father and grandfather, hopes that everyone who sees the image understands that the responsibility to do the right thing resides in all of us.
We just want equality for all races, for all people. But right now we're the ones who seem to be the oppressed ones, and it's about time things were changed, you know, the world over.
Search for solutions amid the chaos across the country.
The Congressional Black Caucus is vowing to crack down on police brutality. Earlier, I spoke with California Congressmember Karen Bass, who calls this a moral moment for America. What can you tell us about legislative solutions being proposed right now by the Congressional Black Caucus?
We are developing a legislative package, and at the center of the package is really passing legislation that allows communities to hold police accountable. So, for example, the police officer that murdered George Floyd, he was fired. Now, if he wasn't arrested, all he had to do was move a few miles away and he could continue to work as a police officer, even though he had numerous complaints against him and had been involved in officer-involved shootings. I think we're at an incredible moment of inflection within our country. This is a moral moment, and I think that the outrage that has been sadly displayed around our country might raise the level of concern to the point where people will be willing to vote for legislation. I think we're in a different moment. What I hope is that we have begun healing in our communities and in our nation. And if it's not the president that can lead our nation, I certainly hope that other leaders, members of Congress, myself, and other people are able to fill in the leadership void that we feel now and promote peace, promote unity, and promote solutions to the long-standing problem of police abuse.
The problem we face is in challenging the flood of propaganda and false narratives and denial that poison the political and social discourse regarding race relations in America. LA progressive publishers Sharon Kyle and Dick Price have made this struggle their common mission.
I am my brother's keeper. Brother's keeper. No, there is no other. This is the promise
devoted our lives to disseminating information about social justice.
Because of who we are and what our interests are, we've focused on the centrality of race to try at best we can to bring black voices and brown voices more into the mainstream because they're typically overlooked.
Well, the thing that's interesting about being married, being in this interracial, we don't even think of ourselves as being an interracial couple. The thing about race is how proximity, being close in community, living, working, playing together is really our only salvation if we're to deal with the racial chasms that exist in the United States. And I would say that in my personal experience, being married to Dick, I did have another husband. I mentioned that I had children when I first came to.
What?
I actually was married to someone else before, and I actually.
Oh, I thought those kids came in the
kids,
mail.
No. So my first husband was and is a black man. And being married to Dick and being a part of his family really opened my eyes to a different kind of way of being. I would tell Dick, and these were just my own personal observations. It was nothing I read about. This was all new to me. He and I would be someplace. Most of the time we were in spaces that were predominantly white, our church, our community. And whenever we'd be, let's say, in a social function, and the conversation touches on race. Everyone gets quiet and they all look at me. And and this happens so often. And I'd say, Dick, clearly between the two of us, I'm the only one that belongs to a race. So, and I noticed that, when I'd have my family gatherings with my biological family, my mom, my dad, my brothers, cousins, and Dick would come. When you're around black people, we are talking about race. This is all the time because we're impacted, we're reminded. It's a constant drip, 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 drip. But then I go around Dick's family and that's like, nobody here belongs to a race except you, Sharon, but nobody else. And so it was sort of an eye-opening experience, the way that I began to see that everybody's racialized except for white people. And so whenever we would talk about race in our publication, it seemed to me that for white people, they would look at it, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me because I clearly don't belong to a race. And I thought, Dick, how can we create, so what I wanted to do, and we've done it, and I think we've kind of been successful, is I've intentionally mixed in articles about domestic policy, foreign policy, race issues in the United States and abroad, but mix it all together so that someone who might come to the LA Progressive because they really are interested in the environment, well, they're going to be reading an article about the environment, also about what happens in the inner cities and how our inner city folk are exposed to all kinds of toxins and so on just because they're in the inner city, and how being black or being Latinx increases your exposure to toxins in a way that would never happen in these wonderful suburbs of the San Fernando Valley.
A lot of places in the rest of the country think California is all this wonderful diversity, majority, minority state. But the fact is that we're still very segregated, and until we address that and do something about that, what's happening in the streets will continue.
And that's why I talk about the centrality of race. If progressives are really serious about wanting to create the kind of civilization, society, community that we want, you gotta be intentional about desegregation.
Right.
That's the only way it's gonna work, in my opinion.
When it comes to intentionality for building bridges across polarized positions in the seemingly intractable Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a movement of great promise led by Israeli women partnering with Palestinian women called Women Wage Peace has been gaining momentum and influence, taking the lead for peace in the region. Robert and I have made several trips to Israel and Palestine, documenting the movement which aligns with the rise of inclusive feminist activism worldwide. Here is the trailer to our film in progress in the Warriors of the Heart series, Women Wage Peace.
And we are doing something very radical that is really changing the reality.
Walls, checkpoints, rules, laws that stop us from meeting each other are designed to keep us invisible from each other, and it makes the dehumanization process easier.
The world, particularly Israel-Palestine, is dominated by male leaders, has ended up in a complete quagmire, in a state of mutual victimization in which each side claims moral virtue by having suffered more. What could be more perverse than that?
There's a lot of peace movements in Israel, but there's nothing that is led and thought and felt by women. So that was 40 women in the very first meeting. Now we're 40,000. We're the fastest growing grassroots movement in Israel right now, and the most active physically out there in the streets.
The 21st century really belongs to women, and we haven't yet seen, I think, a full force of women's power emerge.
We don't want another war.
We unify around the notion that only a political agreement will finally bring peace to this region. It's not going to be another war. It's not going to be if we purchase more tanks and more airplanes.
Just look at this place, how small it is and how long the history of it, and how many walls were built and how many walls were taken down. This wall is going to come down.
We are all victims of the patriarchy that is for thousands of years, that the patriarchy that make us split. So enough of that.
Both sides have searing wounds that define their collective psyche, but celebrating suffering, it embodies toxicity, and we have to move beyond that poison.
Today is for the women who are courageous enough to ask for the unaskable peace.
We are an Israeli movement, and we have the support of our beautiful and courageous Palestinian sisters.
I do believe that this conflict is actually entrenched in a sense of deep losses.
We are tired of paying the price of our children being buried.
The Palestinians see now that there is a real partner on the ground who is trying to change the dynamics inside Israel.
So we are saying it's a myth that it's impossible to do peace here. It's a myth.
I don't think that women can change the political leadership now, but at least they can do the re-education of both people about the other. Everyone who came through this city for thousands of years have a stake in this city. Jerusalem is important for everyone in the world. Her doors have to be open to everyone, and that's the equation for peace.
Idamukla, it is said that women hold up half the sky, and we're taking our roles, our leadership roles now, all over the planet, and certainly through indigenous nations where we have always had leadership roles. Women are chiefs, and they're leaders in social movements now. They lead from the heart, and that is what we need. That is where we find our strength. That is where we find our patience. And that is where we find acceptance of other ideas, openness to different ways of doing things, and finding ways to win without battles, but through persuasion, understanding, and teaching. This is the feminine aspect. And it's necessary to achieve balance. It's necessary to achieve our ends in bringing peace to the planet. All mothers want their children to be safe. All mothers would like to save their children from experiencing war, from participating in war, from harming the children of others. This is not necessary for peace, for prosperity, for security. What's necessary for security is an open heart.
As we've seen in Standing Rock, in Israel and Palestine, in Syria and Africa, in my Pacific Island nations and all around the world, there is a growing recognition that atonement and reconciliation for the sins of the past can have a very transformative effect on all of us today and for our future generations. When I first arrived in Standing Rock with my One Global Family volunteers to stand in solidarity with thousands of water protectors, it happened to be the same day that hundreds of US veterans knelt before our Native American elders and asked for forgiveness to begin the healing of systemic atrocities that befell their ancestors and continues to impact their lives today.
And a couple of the other staff are going to name off the sins that our armed units have committed against Native peoples. And then we're going to apologize on our knees.
We came here to be the conscience of the nation. And in that conscience, we must first confess our sins to you, because many of us, me particularly, are from the units that have hurt you over the many years. We came, we fought you, we took your land, we signed treaties that we broke, we stole minerals from your sacred hills, we blasted the faces of our presidents onto your sacred mountain, and we took still more land, and then we took your children, and then we tried to take your language, and we tried to eliminate your language that God gave you and that the Creator gave you. We didn't respect you. We polluted your earth. We've hurt you in so many ways. And we've come to say that we are sorry. We are at your service, and we beg for your forgiveness.
Let me say a few words. I will accept the forgiveness. World peace. We are a Lakota sovereign nation. We were the nation, and we're still a nation. We do not own the land owns us.
For many months now, the people of the United States, not just my tribe, but the United States, have been gathering and praying. In a way, these veterans are kind of answering that. It's showing that Americans care about what's going on. A large portion of my tribe served in the military. Myself, my brothers, my fathers, all of us have gone to war. And when I see my fellow veterans here, it makes me proud again.
It points to something quite important. Justice and truth must grab hold of the imagination of a populace. The wonder and beauty of life as gift does not work mostly in that kind of rapid upheaval style. It works personally and socially. So that is where nonviolence is a science of personal and social change that is trying to unwrap the laws by which, if people obey those laws, their activity will bear much more fruit, both personally and politically. Gandhi said, in fact, that if you could grab hold of the laws of nonviolent or soul force struggle, you would discover again and again that they work as do the laws of electricity or the laws of gravity. And maybe it has to be said that after all, the cultivation of the soul, the mind, the heart, the cultivation of human family, human community, or what we called in the 60s, beloved community, maybe that is really the beginning of really the last frontier.
Peace Sunday's spiritual call to action to create a peaceful, equitable, and sustainable future for all could not come at a more crucial moment. This is critical. Let us carry the dream as we care for the sick in our families and communities. Let us carry the dream as we work for racial and economic justice. Let us carry the dream as we confront the climate crisis and work for a clean environment and a sustainable future for our children and our children's children. Let us carry the dream as we vote in this year's historic election. Let us make every day a Peace Sunday and a day to work for a better world for all humanity. Thank you so very much.
In honor of the United Nations 75th anniversary, as well as Unity and Diversity World Council's 55th anniversary, we are hereby putting forth a call to action for all of us to make every Sunday Peace Sundays beginning January 2021. We are encouraging our global family to hold peace-building events in your local areas and or online, empowering us to collectively create a more peaceful, equitable, and sustainable world with a much brighter future for all. We will be producing a broadcast series called Sacred Activism Peace Sundays. These broadcasts will address the most critical issues of our time and also highlight registered peace events happening worldwide. The third Sundays will feature a specific story from the We Carry the Dream webumentary film, and the main areas of focus for other Sundays are spiritualization, denuclearization, decolonization, honoring and protecting the sacred, and environmental stewardship. For more information and to register your peace events, please visit us at peacesundays.org.
From the bottom of our hearts, we want to express our love and gratitude to all of you for this sacred gathering time of peace protectors and rainbow warriors.
Remember, we are all in this together. We are truly interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent.
We are one global family, and all life is sacred.
May peace prevail on earth.
This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty.